my name is Olivia Carlson, and today I will be discussing the third session in my professional development plan. My plan was developed for ICS, which is a small Catholic school in Towson that serves students in pre-K through 8th grade. We have a stream curriculum, which means that we must facilitate 3 STEM lessons per class each year, and that is in pre-K through 8th grade. We also have a plethora of technology available to us. Each teacher has an iPad and laptop. Each student in the middle school has an iPad. Each floor in the elementary school has at least one iPad cart and Chromebook cart. And each classroom is equipped with either a Mondo Pad or a smartboard. So we have a plethora of technology and we have a stream curriculum in place. However, teachers who are non-STEM experts struggle to design and facilitate STEM lessons. This is largely in part to a lack of professional development because the program was put in place as our 2 science teachers were on their way out. Therefore, there is a need for further professional development in these areas. This particular professional development session is situated after a session in which teachers have designed their T1 STEM projects, and it is before a session in which teachers learn to analyze data during and after facilitating a lesson. Therefore, this specific session focuses on the facilitation aspect of a STEM lesson. Therefore, the objectives I chose to include were first, that teachers were able to engage in a properly facilitated STEM activity so that they could reflect on their own ability to creatively communicate and make connections. And then teachers would also be able to engage in discussion with subject experts about probing questions that they might ask during a STEM lesson and then make modifications to those questions. In terms of my own development of the professional development session, I focused on 2 specific ISTE standards. First, to create learning opportunities that challenge students or teachers to use a design process and computational thinking to innovate and solve problems, and then use technology to design and implement a variety of formative and summative assessments that accommodate learner needs, provide timely feedback to students, and inform instruction. So in order to accomplish those 2 standards, I was relying heavily on the digital tool Nearpod, and that is how I designed today's lesson. So I will be walking us through that and providing you with the link so that you'll be able to look through it yourself. In order for this lesson to be accomplished, there are a couple of stakeholders involved. First, in engaging in that STEM lesson are the pre-K through 8th grade teachers. And then in terms of facilitating the lesson, we have the principal and vice principal in charge, so that any specific requirements that they see fit to include will be included during this initial process. In total, this will take 1 hour. So the demo STEM activity itself will take 20 minutes in order to complete that design engineering process. And then the question generation will take 15 minutes, and the question review and discussion will take 15 minutes. And then in the end, the teachers will be required to complete a self-reflection based on their experiences during that STEM lesson. Okay, so jumping right into it. So each teacher would sign in, and then they would begin by seeing their objective during the STEM challenge. So they are trying to build the tallest tower with the provided materials within the specified time frame. They are to be working in small groups within their respective grade levels and subject areas, meaning that as an ELA teacher, I would be working with fellow ELA teachers. However, if I was teaching first grade, I would be working with fellow first grade teachers. So it depends on what is the focus at that particular level of schooling. And then in terms of the materials, all we need is dry spaghetti and marshmallows. And this is mainly because the STEM lesson itself is very straightforward and simple. That is not the goal of today's session. The goal is to have teachers engage in this STEM process and in the engineering design process in order to understand how they themselves apply these principles in their own actions and how they can best support their students in the same application. So after they've received that challenge, they begin brainstorming in those small groups. So they would consider what are the optimal tower building methods. I have some VR slides that we'll take a look at in a second that the teachers would use in order to inspire their imaginations and get them thinking outside the box. And the principal and vice principal will be responsible for walking around and making sure that each teacher group is sharing their ideas very openly and listening to their teammates. That is also a crucial part of the STEM process. So the teachers would look at the towers, check out the structure, get some ideas that might prompt how they themselves would build or maybe not build their own structures out of spaghetti and marshmallows. So hopefully they would be focusing on those structural details, getting some ideas, brainstorming, communicating, and then after having brainstormed, they would move on to phase 3, which is the design process. So stage of the process. So in their small groups, they would design a tower based on their brainstorm. So they would use this space to sketch out their own towers. And then after having come up with a solid design of what they want it to look like, they would move on to phase 4. In phase 4, in those small groups, they'd use that design from that previous slide in order to start building. So they'd use those marshmallows and that dry spaghetti, and they would start that construction process until they see that they might need to make revisions. So they'd be able to go back to that previous slide, make revisions, maybe try different structures, see how they work, and after having designed, rebuild, they know that they have exactly 10 minutes, and after those 10 minutes, their towers will be measured. Which brings us to phase 5. So in phase 5, the administrators, again the vice principal and principal, would walk around to compare the heights of each group's tower. While they are doing that, each small group would share what their solution was for the challenge, which is on the following slide. They would want to be as specific as possible in terms of explaining their solution, and they would explain why or why not they believe that their solution was effective. So they would use this space to share those solutions. They'd write down their thoughts and ideas. They can also add pictures. They could take a picture of their own tower if they'd like. And then they would share those with the class. And then after sharing those ideas and having those comparisons be made, we'd move along to something completely different, which is that question generation. So in small groups, the teachers would use the following slide to record the probing questions. So again, while facilitating these STEM lessons, one, kind of guessing what students might ask after having engaged in a STEM lesson themselves. Teachers might have a better idea of this. And then 2, determining how to respond to those student questions. So rather than providing the answer, obviously the STEM method is to answer a question with another question. So this is where the teachers would be coming up with those questions and using these sentence frames to inspire those questions themselves. So in this space, those small groups would discuss and come up with a list of probing questions that they might ask. Again, considering, this is key here, that this specific session is coming after professional development session number 2, which is where the teachers are designing the T1 STEM project. So they've already designed it, and now they're figuring out how to facilitate it. And a big part of that is designing these questions. So they've come up with their list of questions, having had designed their project. What questions might they respond to students' questions with? And then after having submitted those, we move on to the review and discussion of those questions. So science, math, and technology teachers, those STEM experts, would find small groups who are made of teachers that are made of teachers who do not teach STEM subjects. So I myself, as an English teacher, would be in one of those non-STEM subject groups. So I would wait for a science, math, or technology teacher to come on over to my group. Then that teacher, that STEM subject teacher, would read my group's list of potential probing questions and then offer feedback about those questions. Those of us, again, like myself, who do not teach a STEM subject, would discuss the provided feedback with my fellow English teachers or what have you, as well as the STEM experts. And we would then go back to our previous slide and make revisions to those questions that we had already submitted. After having engaged in that lesson and come up with those questions and revise those questions, teachers would then be required to complete a self-reflection. So they would think back to partaking in that STEM lesson and considering themselves as students. So how well did they listen to the ideas of their group mates? How comfortable did they feel expressing their own ideas? How did their group mates respond to those ideas? And then how would they rate their own ability to think creatively? Then they start thinking about the engineering design process. So how important is creativity, and what step is it most important? And then similarly, communication, when is it most important during that design process? And then finally, teachers would wrap up by discussing any connections that they made between their prior knowledge and the STEM challenge. So hopefully, as an English teacher, the connections that I made to the STEM challenge were different than the connections that a math teacher made. And similarly, was the group successful? So they would be thinking as students, again, not focusing on necessarily coming up with the best solution, but coming up with a solution. And the process that it took to get to that solution is the main focus there. So hopefully during that why or why not stage of the explaining here, the teachers will be able to hone in on that process itself. And that brings us to the end of the lesson. So I hope that my professional development session made sense. It is in the context of a 10-session long program, but this third session I thought gave a good encapsulation of the different features that I would hope to include, especially using Nearpod. It's an excellent digital tool. But I hope that you all learned a little more about STEM, and I thank you all for listening.